Everybody loves chocolate, but it often gets a bad rep. So is it deserved, or is chocolate just misunderstood? Some of the concerns are that a lot of the commercially available chocolate, so milk chocolate, candy bars, they have a lot of sugar, and it's the worst kind, the added refined sugar. And another concern is the saturated fat in chocolate. Is that bad for the heart? The sugar's not good. Too much refined sugar is bad news. But the fat is a more interesting story because saturated fat is not all created equal. The fat that's naturally present in chocolate is high in saturated fat, but it's a specific type of saturated fatty acid called stearic acid. And stearic acid is kind of a loophole in the world of saturated fats. It's metabolized differently. It's actually desaturated pretty quickly in the liver. It's converted to an unsaturated fat, oleic acid, which is the same fat you find in olive oil. And in fact, stearic acid does not raise cholesterol, unlike some of the other saturated fats, and it's not linked to a higher risk of heart disease. Another thing we don't want to forget is chocolate is not just about macronutrients. We always obsess about the macros, the carbs, and the fats, but there's a lot of micronutrients in chocolate like polyphenols and flavonols, and these compounds have been shown to improve endothelial function, to help lower blood pressure, and to improve insulin sensitivity, to tune up your glucose metabolism, among other benefits. Bear in mind, these effects are usually seen with dark chocolate or with cocoa powder. So basically the forms of chocolate that are more cocoa and less sugar. If you're confused by all these names around chocolate, the cocoa and the cacao and the cocoa powder and the dark chocolate, that makes two of us. This used to confuse me, so I read up on all this. It's a pretty detailed process, the conversion from the original plant all the way to these products. But basically, cacao is the earlier product. So you got the tree, you got these cacao pods, and then inside you got the cacao beans. And so those are removed and first fermented. That's actually a fascinating story. Most people don't realize that chocolate is fundamentally a fermented food. And then they take those fermented beans and they roast them. And that process, the roasting, is when the cacao becomes cocoa. So the taste changes, and the composition, the nutrients inside change as well through this roasting process. Now, from those roasted cocoa beans, you can basically go two ways. You can get cocoa powder, which is basically concentrated the solids in the beans. So you get rid of most of the fat, most of the cocoa butter, and that's more concentrated in the flavonols because those phytonutrients, those flavonols, are present in the solid parts of the bean, whereas the cocoa butter contains all the stearic acid. Or you can go the other route and you can get dark chocolate, which contains both the solids, the cocoa solids, and the cocoa butter, the fats, mixed. And you can also have some added sugar. That depends on the brand. Some brands sweeten dark chocolate, some don't. But it's still relatively high in cocoa. And then you have all the commercial, more common chocolates, the milk chocolate, the candy bars, which are lower in cocoa because it's more diluted, because essentially you have the solids in there, you have the fat, the cocoa butter in there, but then you have a bunch of additives. They add milk sometimes, they add peanuts, some oils, they add a lot more sugar. So that's basically the order of the cocoa content. Candy bars have the least cocoa, dark chocolate has a lot more, and cocoa powder has the most. And health impact, exactly the same order. Candy bars the worst, dark chocolate good, cocoa powder even better. One more thing to look out for, some brands of cocoa powder are treated through a process. They use an alkaline solution because cocoa powder is in its natural form, is a little bitter. They sometimes use an alkaline solution to alkalinize it and to change the flavor a little. The problem is that process also reduces the flavonols and these antioxidants that confer a lot of the benefits of cocoa powder and dark chocolate. So this procedure is called Dutch processing. It depends a lot on the brands, but in some cases they get rid of most of the flavonols in there. So you want to look for things on the packaging like Dutch process or alkalized or processed with alkali or special dark cocoa. Those are usually processed through this technique. Some common brands that are not Dutch processed include Hershey's Cocoa, 100% unsweetened natural cocoa, as opposed to Hershey's Special Dark, which is Dutch. So you'll see this type of mention on the packaging. Another example is Ghirardelli's unsweetened cocoa, and it also says non-alkalized. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for. So that's for the cocoa powders. The dark chocolate, the bars of dark chocolate are usually not alkalized, usually not Dutch processed. A minority are, and the ones that are will usually say things like processed with alkali. And some of the cheaper dark chocolates, like cheap baking chocolate, those sometimes are alkalized. So for dark chocolate, you're usually in the clear. Most are not Dutch processed. For cocoa powder, a lot are Dutch processed, so you want to be more cautious and look for the ones that are not. Okay, all of that is fantastic, but does chocolate and cocoa powder actually reduce disease? That's what we all want to know. So they actually ran a large randomized trial just a couple of years ago called Cosmos. Well, they tested this idea of the cocoa powder and the health benefits specifically for heart disease. And this was a big trial. Over 800 participants followed for 3.5 years, split randomly, and half got this cocoa extract high in flavonols. And the results were not a slam dunk, but there was a suggestion of a benefit. So their primary outcome was cardiovascular events, so things like heart attacks and strokes all combined, and there was no significant change in that outcome. Although when they looked only at the participants that had the best adherence, so they restricted the analysis to only the people that behaved better, that took the supplements more regularly, then they saw a 15% reduction in cardiovascular events. Also, one of their secondary outcomes was cardiovascular deaths, so deaths from heart attacks or deaths from strokes, and that was significantly reduced by 27%. So some interesting, encouraging results. We want to see this reproduced, but it suggests a possible benefit. Remember, they're using cocoa powder, right? So we can't extrapolate this to like a Snickers bar, unfortunately, or even to dark chocolate if we're being rigorous, because the dose of the cocoa is going to be a little lower. So when it comes to heart health and these types of benefits, our confidence is highest for cocoa powder. So we don't need to completely let go of chocolate, thank God, but it's a good idea to favor chocolates that are higher in cocoa. Over 70% cocoa is a good kind of rule of thumb. Cocoa extract will often be 100% cocoa, especially if it's unsweetened. So you want to favor the dark chocolates. The more cocoa, the better, and the less sugar, the better. So having 1 or 2 squares of dark chocolate is a solid snack, especially if it's replacing other sugary treats. For more tricks to reduce the sugar, the refined sugar in your diet, check out this previous video. I'll see you in there.